I dream about your curvy body." The mountain man declared to the obese beggar, "Get off my platform, you filthy cow!" The station master shouted as his cane struck the ground, scattering a few coins that had barely filled the brim of her hat. The crowd at the Deadwood station laughed cruelly. Passengers turned away from the sight of a heavy, trembling young woman huddled against the brick wall, clutching a tin cup to her chest as if it were her only friend. Her name was Nora O'Sullivan, once a hopeful Irish immigrant, now a beggar in a country that promised freedom but gave her hunger instead. Her cheeks were red from cold, her coat torn at the seams, and her body full, soft, and tired was her greatest shame. No one stopped to help her. No one ever did. But that day, as the autumn wind howled through the Black Hills, someone did stop. A tall, broad man stepped off a freight car, his boots thudding against the frozen planks. He had the look of the wilderness about him, a beard thick as winter pine, a coat of rough leather, and eyes as blue as the mountain sky. He watched the crowd scatter, then turned his gaze to Nora. Something inside him twisted not pity, but recognition. He crossed the distance slowly, knelt beside her, and spoke in a deep, calm voice that carried through the noise of the station. "Are you hungry, lass?" She blinked, unsure whether to answer. "I've seen you here before," the man continued. "I can't stop thinking about you." He reached into his coat and placed a silver dollar in her shaking hand. Then, with a voice that made the entire platform fall silent, he said, "I dream about you, Nora, about your curvy body. You're the most beautiful thing I've seen in years." The laughter died instantly, and just like that, the story of a beggar and a mountain man began. For a long moment, Nora could only stare at him. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not since she left Ireland, not since she'd become invisible. Her heart hammered as if it wanted to escape her chest. "You don't mean that?" she stammered, her Irish accent trembling through the words. The man's eyes softened. "I never say what I don't mean." He stood tall again, the late afternoon light cutting across his broad shoulders. "Name's Caleb Mackenzie. Folks call me Cal. I live up in the Black Hills, North Ridge." The name made a few townsmen glance over. Everyone knew Cal Mackenzie, the mountain man who lived alone with wolves and gold dust. Rumors painted him as half wild, half cursed. Some said he'd killed men in the mines. Others said he'd simply stopped caring after his wife died of fever years ago. To them, he was dangerous. To Nora, he was the first person who had looked at her without disgust. She clutched the silver dollar in her palm as if it were a spark of warmth. "Why would a man like you help a woman like me?" she whispered. Cal's lips curved into a faint smile. "Because you remind me of life before it turned mean." Behind them, the station master snorted. "Don't waste your money on her, Mackenzie. She'll eat you out of your cabin before the week's done." Laughter rippled through the platform again. Cal turned his head slowly. "You say that again," he said quietly, "and I'll make sure you don't have teeth to laugh with." The man froze. Something in Cal's tone, that deadly calm born from years of solitude and loss, made the air heavy. The crowd looked away. Nora's cheeks burned. Never in her whole life had anyone defended her honor. "Please, don't fight for me," she said softly. "It's not worth it." Cal turned back to her. "It is." He extended his gloved hand. "Come with me, Nora. You don't belong here among people who can't see worth when it's right in front of them." Her first instinct was fear. What if he was lying? What if this was another cruel joke, another trap for a desperate girl? But when she looked into his eyes, those calm, unwavering eyes, she didn't see danger. She saw loneliness, the same kind that lived inside her. "I don't have anything," she whispered. Cal shook his head. "You've got a heart still beating. That's more than most in this town." He led her away from the station, each step echoing like the start of something she didn't yet understand. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as the bearded hermit guided the overweight beggar toward a waiting wagon filled with sacks of flour, salted meat, and firewood. As the wheels began to turn, Nora glanced back at the platform where she had once begged for crumbs. The same people who mocked her now stood still, uneasy. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. The train whistled behind them, a scream of iron and steam fading into the mountains, and with it, the last chapter of her old life closed. Ahead, somewhere beyond the pines and snow, waited a cabin, a man, and a future she dared not yet believe in. The wagon rattled over the rough road as the town disappeared behind them. The wind grew colder, and the pine trees thickened, their needles whispering secrets of the mountain. Nora sat quietly beside Cal, her fingers knotted together on her lap. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with unspoken fears and fragile hope. She had never been this far from civilization. The dirt road wound upward like a scar through the hills, flanked by frozen creeks and the cries of distant ravens. Cal handled the reins with a steady hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Finally, Nora spoke. "Do you often take strangers up the mountain with you?" He gave a quiet laugh, low and warm. "Never." "Then why me?" Cal thought for a long moment before answering. "Because I couldn't leave you there." He glanced at her, his blue eyes catching the reflection of snow. "You looked like someone who hadn't been seen in a very long time." Nora turned away, the words cutting deeper than she expected. He was right. For years, she'd been overlooked, dismissed, too fat, too slow, too much of everything except what the world wanted her to be. As dusk fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Cal stopped the wagon near a frozen stream and began setting up camp. He moved with the ease of a man who'd lived in the wild too long to fear it. Within minutes, he'd built a fire and set a kettle over the flames. The smell of coffee and roasted beans filled the crisp air. "Here," he said, handing her a tin cup. "Drink. It'll chase off the cold." Nora accepted it with trembling hands. "I haven't had hot coffee in months." Cal nodded, watching the firelight dance across her face. "You'll have more than coffee now. You'll have peace." The way he said it, quiet, steady, without expectation, made her chest tighten. Later, when the stars spilled across the sky, Nora lay wrapped in a blanket beside the fire. Cal sat a few feet away, sharpening his knife, the rhythmic sound oddly comforting. "You really think I'm beautiful?" she asked suddenly. Cal's hand paused. "I didn't say beautiful, Nora," he corrected softly. "I said you're stunning. Beautiful fades. What you have doesn't." Nora's eyes stung. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know what loneliness looks like. I've lived with it longer than I care to admit." The fire popped, sending sparks into the darkness. For a long while, they said nothing more. But something shifted in that silence, a fragile connection, built not on pity or desire, but recognition. Two souls that had been forgotten by the world had just found each other in its quietest corner. When morning came, the world was silver. Frost clung to the grass and mist drifted through the trees. Cal helped Nora onto the wagon again, his hands rough but gentle. The higher they climbed, the more beautiful it became. Endless forests, distant peaks, the sound of streams under ice. For Nora, who had spent years staring at the same dusty streets, it felt like entering another world. At one point, the road grew narrow, forcing Cal to guide the horses carefully along a rocky ledge. Nora gasped when one wheel slipped. Cal steadied it instantly, muscles flexing beneath his coat. "You're safe," he said without looking back. "I won't let anything happen to you." And she believed him. By the time they reached his cabin, a sturdy log home tucked against the slope, the sun was sinking behind the mountains. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and a dog barked in greeting. "This is it," Cal said, helping her down. "Home." Nora stared at the warm light glowing from the windows. The scent of pine and smoke filled the air. For the first time in years, she felt her heart lift. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Cal smiled, setting a hand on her shoulder. "Everyone deserves a place where they're seen, Nora. This one just happens to be yours." That night, Nora slept in a real bed for the first time in years. The mattress was stuffed with hay and covered with thick quilts that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. The wind howled outside, clawing at the windows, but inside, the cabin was warm and still. For once, the darkness didn't frighten her. When morning came, she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Cal was already at the stove, moving with quiet efficiency. He looked up as she entered, wrapped in one of his oversized shirts. "Morning," he said, voice low and rough with sleep. "Hope you're hungry." "I'm always hungry," Nora admitted, half smiling. "Good. Means you're alive." He placed a plate in front of her: eggs, bread, and thick slices of bacon. "Eat all you want. There's plenty." No one had ever said that to her before. Eat all you want. Usually people told her the opposite. Nora blinked back tears and began eating slowly, savoring every bite. Cal sat across from her, sipping coffee. "You can stay as long as you like," he said after a moment. "You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't ask for anything in return." Nora looked up. "Why are you doing this for me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Because I see you, Nora, and I think you've been unseen for far too long." Her breath caught. No man had ever touched her like that, not with hunger, but with care. Days passed, then weeks. The snow deepened, sealing them off from the world below. Life on the mountain was hard, but it was honest. Nora learned to cook over the hearth, to chop wood, poorly at first, and to milk the goat that Cal jokingly called the meanest woman on the ridge. At night, they read by the fire, Cal's deep voice rolling through the cabin as he read her poems by Whitman and letters from home he'd never sent. Nora mended his shirts by lamplight, humming softly to herself. "You sing," Cal said one evening, smiling. "I used to, back home, before." She trailed off. "Before life got hard?" She nodded. "Sing again," he said simply. "You've got a voice that makes the room warmer." She hesitated, then began softly, an Irish lullaby her mother used to sing. The melody filled the cabin like candlelight. Cal leaned back, eyes half closed, listening. When she finished, there was silence, soft, heavy, perfect. "You brought music back into this house," he said quietly. Something in Nora bloomed that night. The shame that had clung to her body for years began to loosen its hold. Cal never looked at her with pity. He looked at her like a sunrise, slow, steady, impossible to ignore. Sometimes, when she was washing dishes or feeding the fire, she would catch him watching her, not hungrily, not possessively, just seeing her. Every curve, every scar, every part of her that she'd been taught to hide. "You stare too much," she teased one day. "Can't help it," he said, grinning beneath his beard. "You're art that breathes." Nora flushed, pretending to scold him. But that night, when she caught her reflection in the window, she didn't cringe. She traced her own cheek and whispered, "Art that breathes." Winter turned the world white. Storms howled for days, trapping them inside. They cooked, laughed, repaired tools, told stories. Once, during a blizzard, the roof began to leak, and Nora climbed up with Cal to patch it, her laughter echoing through the wind. "You don't belong in the streets, Nora," he said, wiping snow from her face. "You belong here, in the light, in warmth." Their first kiss came not from passion, but from gratitude. He'd burned his hand fixing the stove, and she grabbed it, blowing gently on the skin. When their eyes met, the space between them disappeared. It was clumsy, tender, and full of the ache of two people who had forgotten how to be held. After that, nothing had to be said. The air between them changed. When he brushed against her shoulder, her pulse quickened. When she laughed, he couldn't look away. And on one quiet morning, as sunlight spilled across the cabin, Cal said softly, "You know what I dream about now?" Nora smiled. "You already told me once." He shook his head. "No, not your body anymore. I dream about you waking up beside me every day, smiling like that." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were the good kind, the kind that come when you realize you're no longer alone. Spring came late to the Black Hills. The snow melted in rivers down the mountain, feeding the valleys below. Nora had planted wildflowers near the cabin and often sat by the window, sewing or humming while Cal worked outside. Life finally felt simple, safe. But peace in the frontier never lasted long. One afternoon, Cal rode down to the town of Deadwood for supplies. He didn't return that night. Nora waited by the window until the candle burned out, her stomach twisting with worry. By dawn, she saddled the mule and rode down the muddy trail herself. When she reached the general store, people were whispering. She caught snatches of conversation. Cal's name, that big miner, the fat Irish woman, Sin. The sheriff, a wiry man named Amos Trent, stepped out of the saloon and looked her over with thinly veiled disgust. "You must be the girl," he said. "The girl?" Nora repeated. "The beggar he took up the mountain. Folks been talking, saying you bewitched him. That man was respectable once before you came along." Nora's throat tightened. "Where is he?" "Jail," the sheriff said. "Got into a fight at the saloon. Beat a man half to death." Her heart sank. "Why?" Amos smirked. "Because the man called you a hog. Said you were stealing his pity." Cal broke his jaw clean in two. "Guess chivalry's still alive." Nora's vision blurred. Without another word, she ran toward the jailhouse. Inside, Cal sat behind iron bars. Blood dried on his knuckles, but eyes calm as a winter lake. "Nora," he said softly when he saw her. She gripped the bars. "Why would you do that?" He looked away. "Because he deserved it." "You can't fight everyone who insults me," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "They'll never stop." He stood, towering even in the small cell. "Then I'll never stop fighting for you." Sheriff Trent leaned back in his chair, chewing tobacco. "You can't fight words, mountain man. The law's the law. $50 bail or he stays put till the judge rides through? $50. It might as well have been 1,000. Nora had nothing, no savings, no valuables, except the small gold locket she wore around her neck. Inside was a tiny photograph of her parents. She took it off and placed it on the desk. "This is worth something. Please let him go." The sheriff eyed it, then grinned. "You really do love that brute, don't you?" She didn't answer. By dusk, Cal was free. As they rode back up the mountain, neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Nora whispered, "They'll never stop talking about us, will they?" "Let them talk," Cal said. "We know the truth." But the truth had layers neither of them yet understood. A week later, a letter arrived by rider addressed to Cal, sealed with the emblem of a mining company. Nora handed it to him, and as he read, his expression darkened. "They want the land," he said grimly. "Turns out the gold vein I've been working runs under their claim. They say I'm trespassing. They'll send men to force me off." "Can they do that?" He folded the letter. "They'll try." Over the next few days, tension thickened like storm clouds. Cal reinforced the cabin shutters, moved supplies inside, and loaded his rifle. Nora tried to stay calm, but each hammer strike echoed with fear. Then one morning, she woke to find Cal gone and fresh boot tracks leading into the trees. She followed them until she reached a clearing near the creek. Cal stood facing 3 men in fine coats, armed and smirking. "You can't just take what isn't yours, Mackenzie," the leader sneered. "Sell us your land, or we'll make sure no one finds you or your fat whore again." Nora froze. The word hit her like a slap. Cal didn't move. "Say that again," he said quietly. The man laughed. "You heard me?" The next moment, Cal's fist connected with his jaw. A gun fired. Nora screamed. Birds exploded from the trees. When the smoke cleared, one man was on the ground clutching his leg, another running, and Cal stood bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. He turned to Nora. "We're leaving now." They packed what little they could carry and rode north, away from the valley, into higher ground. The cabin that had been their sanctuary vanished behind the ridge. That night, as they camped under a canopy of stars, Nora cleaned the wound on his arm. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "I'd die before I let them touch you," he said. She pressed a hand to his cheek. "Don't say that. I just got you." He caught her hand and kissed her palm. "Then I'll live for you instead." She smiled through tears, but deep down, she knew their fight wasn't over. Men like those didn't give up easily. Days turned into weeks as Cal and Nora hid high in the Black Hills, where snow still clung to the shadows and the wind howled through the pines like a restless ghost. They built a small lean-to near the riverbank, surviving on smoked venison and melted snow. Nora kept a fire burning constantly, partly for warmth, partly for hope. But Cal knew the men from the mining company wouldn't stop. They wanted his claim, and they would come with more than threats next time. One gray dawn, Nora was fetching water from the creek when she saw them. 3 riders winding up the trail, rifles slung across their saddles. She ran back toward camp, breath ragged. "Cal, they're coming!" He was already on his feet, loading the Winchester. "Get inside. Don't come out until I say." "Please don't fight them," she begged. "We can go farther north. We can—" He shook his head. "If we run now, we'll keep running forever. This ends today." The riders dismounted at the edge of the clearing. Their leader, the same man Cal had punched before now with his arm in a sling, sneered. "You've got no right to that land, Mackenzie. Hand over the deed, or we'll take it off your corpse." Cal stepped forward, calm but unyielding. You're standing on ground I bled for. This land feeds my cattle, my life. You'll leave now or stay forever under it. The man laughed. Big words from a dirt miner and his fat Irish whore. A single gunshot cracked through the mountain air. The man's hat flew off his head, a bullet hole smoking through the brim. Cal didn't even blink. The next one goes between your eyes, he said evenly. The men hesitated, hands hovering over their holsters. Then Nora appeared in the doorway, clutching Cal's old revolver hands, trembling, but eyes fierce. He's not alone, she said. The leader's smirk faltered. You wouldn't shoot. Try me, Nora said, the gun steadying as she spoke. I've spent my whole life being called worthless. Today, I decide what I'm worth. The silence stretched. A crow called in the distance. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt. This ain't over, he muttered, signaling his men to retreat. The law'll hear about this. Cal lowered his rifle, watching them disappear down the trail. Then he turned to Nora. Her hands were still shaking, but she didn't drop the gun. He walked over, gently took it from her, and set it aside. You were incredible, he whispered. She looked up at him, tears glimmering in her eyes. I was terrified. You were brave, he said, and that's what matters. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. The world around them was still dangerous, but for that moment, under the cold mountain sky, they were unbreakable. We'll rebuild, Cal said softly. Somewhere new, somewhere they can't find us. Nora leaned into him, her voice barely a whisper. I don't care where we go, as long as it's with you. Spring crept slowly into the black hills, melting the snow and washing the past away. Cal and Nora moved deeper into the mountains, finding a quiet meadow where wildflowers grew by the river. There they built a new cabin, stronger, warmer, and filled with laughter instead of silence. Every morning, Cal rose before dawn to chop wood, and every morning he found Nora waiting by the stove, stirring oatmeal, humming softly. He never tired of that sound. At night, they sat together by the fire. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't have to. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of trust, comfort, and something deeper than either had dared to hope for. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the mountains, Cal brushed a lock of hair from her cheek and whispered, You're safe here. Nora smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. I never thought I'd belong anywhere, she said. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Cal reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring plain, but made with his own hands, hammered from a nugget of gold he'd found the day they fled the mine. It's not much, he said, sliding it gently onto her finger, but it's everything I have. Nora looked down at the ring, then up at him. You've already given me everything, she whispered. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying their laughter into the valley below. The mountains stood tall around them, silent witnesses to a love that had survived hunger, cruelty, and fear. And though the world beyond the hills might still judge them, in this quiet place with firelight in her eyes and his arms around her, Nora finally knew peace. Every love story leaves a mark not on paper, but in the hearts that dare to believe again. Nora's journey reminds us that beauty isn't measured by size, money, or what others whisper behind closed doors. It's found in the courage to keep loving, even after the world has called you unworthy. Somewhere out there, someone is waiting to see you the way Cal saw Nora, completely, honestly, and without judgment. Wherever you're listening from tonight, remember this. You are not too much, and you are not too little. You are exactly enough. If you still believe in love, stay. The next story begins soon.